This is lesson 9.3, solving percent problems. Our essential question is, how do you use percent to solve problems? In the example below, we have a sports store received a shipment of 400 baseball gloves. 30% were left-handed. How many left-handed gloves were in the shipment? So here we have 30% means 30 out of 100. That's what percent is. It's out of 100 or per 100. There were 30 left-handed gloves for every 100 baseball gloves. That's what 30% is. But there weren't just 100 gloves. There were a total of 400 gloves in the shipment. So how do we find the percent or the number of gloves that were left-handed? Well, if we have 100 gloves here, then we have 30 of them were left-handed. If we have 100 gloves here in this section, how many were left-handed? 30. And we have a total of 400 gloves in the shipment, so that means that this section here will have 100 gloves. And of those 100 gloves, 30 were left-handed. And in this section we have 100 gloves, and out of that 100, there were 30 that were left-handed. So 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100 gives us 400 total gloves. And how can we use this diagram to find the total number of left-handed gloves? Well, if we have 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 30, that equals 120 gloves. So that means that there, out of the 400 gloves, 120 of them were left-handed gloves. So how can we use proportions to find the same amount? Well, a percent written as a ratio represents a part to a whole, where the percent is the part and the 100 is the whole. So in this problem, the part is the left-handed gloves, where the whole is the entire shipment. So how do we work this out? Well, we need to figure out how to go from 100 to 400. And to do that, you multiply by 4. So that didn't turn out very well because of the color. I'm sorry. You multiply by 4. And if we multiply the bottom by 4, what do we multiply the top by? 4. And if you have 30 times 4, 3 times 4 is 12. And if you add the 0 on the end, you get 120 gloves. Is that the same as above? Yes, it is. Alright, you can also use multiplication to find the same amount as well. We can either multiply by a fraction or multiply by a decimal. In this example, we'll multiply by the fraction. So 30% of 400 is the same thing as 30 over 100 of 400. So remember, of means multiply. So if we have of right here in between our percent and our whole, then we can just put a multiplication sign there. And we're going to place a 1 under 400 so that it looks like a decimal, and then we'll cross multiply. I'm sorry, so that it looks like a fraction, and then we'll multiply across. Alright, so 30 times 400. 3 times 4 is 12. You have a 0 at the end of 30 and 2 zeros at the end of 400. So that gives us 12,000 over 100 times 1 is 100. So then we need to simplify by dividing the top and the bottom by 100. And that leaves us with 112 left-handed gloves. Alright, so there are 3 total ways to find the percent or the part of a whole amount. We can use proportional reasoning, and when we use proportional reasoning, we create fractions that are ratios of a part to whole, and then we hamburger. Alright, how do we multiply by a fraction? if you want to multiply by a fraction, turn your percent to a fraction by setting the quantity over 100 and multiply by the whole amount to find the part. Alright, and then to multiply by a decimal, turn your percent into a decimal by following your equivalent triangle and multiply by the whole amount. Now when you multiply by a fraction and then multiply by a decimal, you're always multiplying that by the whole amount in order to find a part. Alright, so let's practice using proportional reasoning to find 28% of 25. So first we need to set up a proportion with part to whole ratios. So our proportion here will have the part of 28%. And when you turn 28% into a fraction, you put that over 100. And it says 28% of 25. So if we're wanting to find a part, then that means 25 must be our whole. So on the bottom of that fraction, we'll have 25. So we're trying to find this part up top. Alright, so find the multiplication factor. That means we need to hamburger. So again, I want us to write the 28 over 100, and then the whole that is given is 25. So we need to find out how to go from 100 to 25, and that's dividing by 4. So what do we do to our 28 to get over here? We need to, divide by 4. And then we need to write our numerator. So again, if we have 28% as 28 over 100, our whole is 25, then our part, 28 divided by 4, is 7. That means if you have an item that's $25 and it's 28% off, we're going to take $7 off. Let's look at multiplying by a fraction to find 35% of 60. So first we need to write the percent as a fraction. So 35% of 60 means that we will put 35 over 100, and that is 35% of 60. So then we need to multiply. So 35 over 100 of 60 means that 35 over 100 times 60 gives us 2,100 over 100. And when you simplify that, we'll divide the top and the bottom by 100. So that means 35% of 60 is 21. Now, when you look at that, some of you might say, oh, well, the answer is 2,100 or 2,100. Well, if we're finding a part of 60, would it make sense that the part is bigger than 60 if the percent is less than 100 or less than the whole? No. So make sure you reason through that. All right, let's try multiplying by decimal to find 5% of 180. So first we need to write the percent as a decimal. Find the equivalent decimal. That's what that means. So 5% as a fraction is 5 over 100. And when we say 5 over 100, that is stated 5 100ths. And written as a decimal, 5 100ths is decimal 0.5. So that is our decimal form. So we have a triangle that tells us how to find equivalent fraction decimals and percents, and that's what you use to find these three. Alright, then we'll just multiply. So 5% of 180, that means that we will multiply 5/100 times 180, and that equals 9. So 5% of 180 is 9. Alright, let's look at this example below. It says 12 of the students in the high school choir like to sing solos. These 12 students make up 24% of the choir. How many students are in the choir? So I want you to pause the video and try to solve this with all three methods and see what you get. When you resume the video, I will have the answers to which one is correct. So when I set up a proportion of 12 students make up 24% of the choir, that means that 12 students is my part because 24% is the part. My unknown is the students in the choir. How many total are there? So when I set up my proportion or my percent as a ratio, I have 24 over 100, and I know that part of my students is 12, but I want to know out of how many total. So how do you go from 24 to 12? You divide by 2. So what do you do to your 100? Divide by 2. So that means that 50 students are in the total choir. So does that make sense that if part of the choir likes to sing solos, and those who sing solos are 12 students, that there are 50 total students? Yes, because 12 is less than 50, but it's about 25% less, or about a fourth of the student population. What if we multiplied? Well, if we have 12 over 1 times 24 over 100, that gives us 288 over 100, and when you simplify that or use ice cream to divide, you get 2.88. So, if 12 students like to sing solos, how many total students are in the choir? Well, it's certainly not 2 and a partial amount of students. Same thing over here. If we turn our 24% into a decimal, we have 24 hundredths. And if we multiply that times 12, again, we get 2.88. And if you remember before, I said that if you're going to multiply, then you need to multiply by the whole. So if we're multiplying by the part, that will give us the incorrect answer. If we are looking for the part instead of the whole, we would need to divide, and I'll go over that at a later time.